Welcome to FitBody Lifestyle, the show where we dive deep into the world of fitness, health, business, relationships, and the art of living a balanced life. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Greg, and we're here to give you the benefit of our experiences in the fitness and bodybuilding industry, the corporate world, running a business, personal development, and building healthy relationships.
Whether you're sweating it out in the gym, hustling in your business, or seeking balance in your everyday life, you're in the right place.
So lace up those sneakers, grab that water bottle, and let's get ready to transform our minds, our bodies, and our lives. Welcome to FitBody Lifestyle, and today's topic is one that we get asked a lot in our world, which is the difference between macros-based nutrition and meal plan-based nutrition. And so this becomes a very important topic for us because there are advantages and disadvantages to both. And maybe out the gate, as we talk about, first of all, we'll talk about what they are. And then the second thing is just we'll talk about what are the advantages and disadvantages of both. And then the third part, we will give you some perspective on why we prefer one over the other for ours. But before we do, Jamie, will you just tell, because your history about why you arrived at a macros focus for orientation for Fit Body Fusion, that story is pretty interesting. And I know it because I lived it with you, but I'd like you just to tell everybody why you decided that macros was a better and more sustainable alternative.
Well, now you gave away the answer already.
I did. Sorry about that.
So, talking first of all, what do we mean when we say meal plan versus what do we mean when we say macros? So what we mean when we say a meal plan is this is a structured plan that you're going to repeat every single day. So that's how I started. I started out with a meal plan, and there are definitely benefits. It's simpler. It's easy to grocery shop. It's easy to prep for. You can measure out all your meals. It's just very simple. You don't have to question yourself or any thought process any step of the way. And I think that worked out really well for me in the beginning. The issue that I ended up running into is that I got really bored with the same foods that I was repeating over and over each and every day. And I found that cravings started to become an issue. So even things that I didn't normally even want to eat, all of a sudden I wanted them just because it was different from what I had been eating every single day on the meal plan. And when macros came on the scene, initially I think a lot of people kind of poo-pooed the idea of it, thinking that, okay, when we talk about macros, you have an allotment. And within that allotment, you get to choose the foods each day that you're eating. So that's the difference. So, either way, with it, whether it's a meal plan or macros, you're still following a certain count of macros. The difference is the flexibility. So with the macros-based approach, you have a certain number of grams of carbohydrates and protein and fat. And within that, you get to choose the foods that you're going to eat. Now, there's also hybrids in between. We do put some caveats on it because we don't want people eating a bunch of junk food, which is what happened initially, I feel like, with myself and with people in general when the idea of macros came and started becoming popular.
And there's that phrase, that acronym, right? IFYM, if it fits in my macro, if it fits in my macros, right?
If it fits your macros, yes. And that was really was trending and everything else. And so you saw people that were, Pop-Tarts for some reason became the food that was,
the food du jour.
Which I never got because it's a lot of macros you give up for something that, in my opinion, isn't that good. But regardless, what ended up happening is, and a lot of times when people do initially start macros, they might choose a lot more processed foods and things like that. So when we're coaching and we're using macros, we do give some guidelines around that. So we're still sticking to whole foods. But the idea here is that, when I was on the meal plan, let's say I had my oatmeal in the morning and I was able to have a quarter cup of blueberries, let's say. What if I wanted strawberries instead that day? Nope, not on the meal plan. Whereas with macros, I can swap it out for the strawberries. And now I feel happy and satiated and excited that, I got to have something that I was craving. So that is just a little bit of the difference between the two, and the reason why for me having that little bit more flexibility, not necessarily to eat a bunch of garbage things, but allowing me to make some choices for myself helped me stay on track and deal with those cravings that I was having.
And certainly within those choices that you make, and that is honestly a disadvantage of the macro-based approach is that you can make those choices, and some of those choices may not be the best choices for you in terms of just how much macros they consume. So the Pop-Tart's a great example, alcohol being another example, and we talk to people about how to convert that over so that they are taking those into account in their macros. But meal plan, I mean, going back to, again, back in my day, which we will always joke about, but it was a meal plan for me. It was a meal plan, and it was not the same food every day, but it was selection. So I could have chicken or fish. I could have red meat or turkey. I could have a potato, or I could have rice. It was those things, but it was very restrictive in terms of the selections that I had. Is there a hybrid between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and there are ways to make a meal plan more flexible, like what you just described. I would say the downside to that is all those things are not equal. So while they're close, chicken versus, let's say, a chicken breast versus whitefish. Yes, those are two great protein sources, but they don't have the same fat content. There is a bit of a difference. So 4 ounces of a chicken breast is not completely equal to 4 ounces of whitefish, let's say. And
just, if I can interrupt for just a second. So, but within that, though, from a caloric point of view, I may be able to get the same calories out of a representative portion of chicken and fish, but the macros for each of those would be different.
Well, the calories would actually be different as well. So both of those are not going to equate exactly.
Okay.
Whereas when we're doing it and we're logging it and we're doing a macros-based approach, it's going to give us a bit more of a little bit more exact, on all of those fronts, on the calories as well as the because I mean, those things do equate. And it just depends on too, like, what is your goal? I think that's a really important thing. I mean, if that works better for somebody and their goal is to live a fitness lifestyle, they're not necessarily, in prep or wanting to get on a bodybuilding stage, then those swaps are really wonderful and will work out just fine. When we want more control, when we're competing, especially at these higher levels, we're going to want a much more detailed approach. It's kind of like you and I have talked about. If you're doing a fitness lifestyle, you can really eyeball portions. You don't maybe necessarily have to measure and weigh every single thing versus when you're on prep, then, we need to be a little bit more exact with it. So I feel like there are different levels within tracking macros as well as within what you're describing as kind of a more hybrid meal plan with some substitutions.
Right.
And what fits better for that individual.
And I do think, as we talk about the why, and again, as we've talked about, why is going to appear, I dare say that why will appear in every episode at some point. But the why you are doing it and what your goals are or what your objective is, those are factors that definitely come into play, along with when you're doing this. So where are you at in your prep? Are you in an improvement season, which we'll talk about later, or are you in the prep? Are you cutting is it a peak week where you're getting ready for a show in that same week? So the where you are obviously controls that. I'm going to go to our mission, though, because, again, I'm a big mission-focused guy, and maybe that belies the time in the Army that I spent, but everything is about mission. And in our mission, we have a balanced and sustainable lifestyle. And I do think, along with the community aspect, because I do think the macros community is a little bit different than the meal plan community. And I'm not digging either one or saying one is better than the other, but I do think in the macro space, because we have some groups within FitBody Fusion, the Platinum group is one that comes to mind, where I am always seeing people share recipes about how they're prepping or working within their macros. I'm not saying you can't do that in meal plan. You probably can. But macros gives you that flexibility. And again, I digress, I guess. Going back to that mission part, how does macros flow in, or how do the macros approach flow into a balanced and sustainable lifestyle?
Well, you certainly have more flexibility when it comes to social events, eating out at restaurants, things like that. Again, it's going to depend on where you are in your journey. If you're, in an improvement season, then certainly being more flexible is going to be a lot more acceptable than if you're in a prep and you're getting closer to your showtime where you've got to get a lot more exact with your food choices and measurements and things like that. I will just say for me, now that I'm not competing anymore, the fact that I did track macros for as long as I did makes me automatically better at selecting foods when I go out to a restaurant and things like that. I remember when I first started tracking macros and you would order something and I'd say, oh, would you like to know how many carbohydrates or how much fat's in that? And you're like, please don't tell me. By doing all that research that I did in order to log all the foods, what I ended up realizing is sometimes you order the salad in the restaurant thinking you're doing something good and the macros aren't as good as the burger, because of the dressing or, all of the extra added fats and things like that are added into it. So what it ends up being, and what it ended up being for me is really an education. I know sometimes when I have somebody who's doing macros, they want to just not track when they go out and eat. And I encourage them, even if you loosely track, it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, especially if you're not on season or if you're a lifestyle or transformation person. But just getting a better idea of what things add up to is going to help you make the better choices when you go along. And this will bleed over into your life beyond any kind of fitness sort of goal or competition or whatever. It's going to help you, make good choices for the rest of your life.
And that story, it was a chicken pot pie,
yes,
I believe.
It was.
I'm not going to disclose the name of the restaurant, but it was a chicken pot pie. And it wasn't the calories, although the calories were way higher than what I thought. It was the fat content that just blew me away. I just had no idea. And this is, as we talk about conscious eating, which I think is really kind of what you're getting into as you talk about building that awareness through the habit that you formed in logging your food. So one of the things I think in this space of macro eating is this whole notion of intuitive eating. Mm-hmm. And we have several athletes who do intuitive eating as a singular approach, but that intuitive eating was founded on a lot of familiarity, a lot of time tracking food. So I guess, would you describe intuitive eating and just kind of as an approach?
100%. And I love that you brought that up because I eat 100% intuitively now. And I'm able to maintain exactly my weight barely fluctuates at this point. And we go out to eat a lot. We DoorDash a lot. I just know how to make the choices. And it's because of the background in logging macros and making them fit that, if I do, and I used to occasionally just log my day just to kind of check in and see where I'm at. And it's amazing how close I am to where I know my maintenance calories are each day. So, I always tell people it's one of those things where if you want to master something, you go through the coursework, you have to do the work. And I'm not going to lie, when I very first started tracking macros, it was frustrating. Change this and it messes, change this to get my carbs right and then it messes up my fats. But within, a matter of weeks and then months, it became second nature and very easy. So it's really a skill that you're developing, not to do it for the rest of your life necessarily, but to understand, first of all, where is your maintenance calories? Being able to reverse diet, which I know we'll talk about on another episode, the purpose being to raise your metabolism. You start to learn what you can do and what your body responds best to. Even journaling, how you felt after different meals, which I encourage people to a lot, especially if they're having any kind of digestion issues.
And let me interject something there because I do think that's very important. On a meal plan, one of the things that I think is a risk is being able to identify the foods that work best with your body. Again, I think you can do that in a meal plan, but I do think in the macro approach in particular, one of the things that we really emphasize is making sure that you experiment with food. Find out, oh my gosh, I have this reaction to broccoli, but I don't have the same reaction to asparagus or cauliflower or peas or beans or whatever that food is. We do encourage that experimentation because it's really important to figure out what works best for you. And again, in a recurring theme on I guess I'll maybe say hashtag fusion hacks. figure out what works best for you. And the macro approach is really designed around that approach. I think about the intuitive eating a lot. We work with, as I said, we've worked with several athletes, one of whom is very successful at this intuitive eating, but she only got there after forming that foundation, that foundational skill, as you talk about, of being able to know portions, food, macro content. So you're staying within those guardrails. And I know in our next episode, or one of these episodes, we're going to talk about travel tips and tricks. And I think that comes into that aspect, because you may not always have the tools available to measure accurately, or I should say to measure precisely. Because I do think once you've built that skill, there's an intuition that puts you accurate. But again, I guess it goes into what is accurate, right?
Right. Well, and one of the things I talk to a lot of people that are just starting to embark on a fitness journey, and maybe they've never tracked their food before, it can sometimes seem a little bit overwhelming, is you can actually do macros and a meal plan simultaneously.
Right.
And basically what that would mean is, you have your macro goals set in place, you create a day, and then you repeat it. There's a meal plan, boom. The nice thing about it, though, is that if something were to go wrong, and it happens, you go into work and there was some cookies that they had baked fresh and you ate one. Oh no, now my meal plan is just ruined for the day. Well, no, I can actually go in now, add that cookie in, and then modify the rest of my day so that way it doesn't throw everything off. So I do like that aspect of it. Or maybe you have a special occasion, and I really feel like it's important to be able to participate. And food is a part of just about everything we do in life. Whether it be you're going to your grandmother's house and she's making your, favorite chicken and dumplings, or your favorite coconut cake. I'm kind of giving away some of my grandmother's favorites.
The coconut cake that required a Sawzall to get through, because
only one time it did turn into concrete, but we won't talk about that one. But I want to be able to then, take part, and that means something to her that I'm having a slice of her cake,
right,
or some, so being able to then estimate that and then work the rest of my day around it. So I can just go sit, be part of the family, enjoy some of the food, and not feel guilty or be eating out of Tupperware where, it hurts someone's feelings. I feel like those things are really important.
They are.
These are important people in our lives. So, those are some of the benefits that I've experienced from having that little bit more flexibility.
And certainly there is a biological imperative or physiological imperative to eat. That there's biology, chemistry that goes on in my body that makes me want to eat. But that is absolutely influenced by the psychological, by emotional, behavioral. These are the aspects that flow into that process of eating. And I think the important piece here to mention is that your relationship with food is a cornerstone aspect of any successful plan that you embark upon. And knowing that you have a good relationship with food where you can decouple food from fun. It doesn't mean that, for example, as we're talking about this, to be able to go to a family event and partake in your grandmother's special coconut cake, or to be able to partake in something, crawfish, because I know that we just did that in Louisiana a few months ago. Being able to do those things with a knowledge that, okay, I can fit this within my plan. I can fit this within my macros and still stay relatively good within my guardrails, again, based on where you are and what your objectives are. But I do think that there is a mindset aspect that's so important to that. And I know in a future episode, we're going to talk about the abundance mindset versus the restriction mindset, and how that also then relates to the growth versus fixed mindset. And we'll get into that a little bit later, or a little bit in another show. But in this macro space, I think, I want to go back. I want to dial back, turn back the clock a little bit, because I want to give people a little bit of knowledge as to how we got there. And when we met, you were a raw vegan, correct? Sorry, I'm turning into lawyer again, but correct. You were a raw vegan at the time we met.
I'm being deposed now, guys. I'm getting nervous as to where this conversation is going. Yes, I was a raw vegan when we met, and you were in the military.
I was.
I used to make these green smoothies that looked like swamp sludge that he would drink at his.
I would bring into a deposition. I would put a mason jar of this green kind of swamp water on the table, and I always found that the person I was deposing was more distracted by my swamp water than they were with answering the question. So that always made for some interesting depositions. But I agreed or willingly did the raw vegan lifestyle with you. We had a vegan wedding. Would we call that a raw vegan wedding? Because we had some cooked food there for other people, didn't we?
Yeah, we had some cooked food.
And I shouldn't be asking you that question. I know the answer. But part of our wedding also in Costa Rica was as a destination wedding was the second week, our honeymoon, was at a raw food retreat. So that's kind of where we started this journey into macroism. I don't know if that's a word, but I'll just call it a macroism. And then you decided to start competing, and you started with a meal plan. And I some of the experiences, the one thing that really stands out during that time of the meal plan were two things. One, when you ate that congealed cod because you were so hungry. Do you remember that?
Yes. Yes. So I want to add too that, I went to a lot of extremes when it came to nutrition. Like I've always been so interested in health and nutrition. And back in the day I did Atkins, which we now call keto. They're very, very similar, if not exactly the same. I became vegan. I did a lot of different things, and I'm not anti any of these different, styles or philosophies if they work for you. But that's why I ended up starting my PhD in holistic nutrition, is that I wanted an answer. I wanted the answer. What is the best way to eat? And, and you and I often talk that I left with more questions than answers, because there's not one best way. And this is where starting out with the meal plan, and then eventually, morphing into the macros, it really allowed for some of that flexibility, to be able to, because we coach vegans, we coach people that are, that like, for whether it be for ethical reasons or dietary reasons, different types of ways of eating, but you can still fit it within your macros. But yes, when I was on the meal plan, what had happened was, is that I had, I believe, of course, the bodybuilding fish, favorite fish is tilapia, and which I've never quite understood, because they're the bottom feeders that eat the poop off the bottom of the, I don't know, it just doesn't, Anyway, the store didn't have any. So it was actually, I believe, snapper that I ended up, because that was the closest thing that they had. And so I had to pre-cook my meals. We were traveling to a show. We weren't going to have a microwave, and my fish turned into like a gelatin. And no, I didn't eat it because it was nasty.
Yeah, it was very nasty. I remember seeing that. I don't know. I will tell you that I've eaten bugs, and I've eaten some other stuff that was uncooked, and some of those experiences. But it was, I will tell you, I do not now know how you got that fish down.
I didn't.
Well, you got a little bit of it down.
little bit, yes.
But you were hungry. And,
yes.
And I think,
I've also eaten chicken popsicles a few times.
Oh, God. Yeah, that's that. The point that I really wanted to give in that history is that, our arrival at macros as an approach, as a belief system, philosophy approach, whatever you want to call it. We don't pray to macro gods or anything, so it's not like that. We just believe that it's more sustainable, but there is some work involved. There is that transition and that awareness that you're building, but through that awareness and through that knowledge, then you become, it really, I know I probably keep hitting in this, and this is a little bit repetitive, but I really just want to emphasize that aspect of a sustainable lifestyle. And I think the story you gave about the history and where we started with this and how we arrived at this, we found that, especially during the time when we were raw vegans, is that you're right, there was no one approach, but there was a lot of truth in many different approaches. And I think, thematically, as we talk about this, it's really important for people to understand that there is no one right way. There are definitely some wrong ways, but within the right ways, there are many approaches. And at the end of it, it's what's going to work for you and what's most successful for you and what's sustainable for you. What will you do? I know we get asked this question a lot. What's the best workout? What's the best food? What's the best macro content? And the answer to most of this is it depends, which is our favorite response. But the end of it also is a belief in this concept, which is there is no best workout that you can do. The best workout is the one you will do. And the same is true of your nutrition, is that there is no best approach to nutrition because you can do any one of them. It's the one you will do that becomes sustainable for you. And how did that become sustainable for you? What triggered that switch to make you believe that was the right approach?
The macro approach was what really clicked for me is I for me needed that mental freedom to know I'm at choice. If I know so often we encounter this when we're, we don't like the 4-letter word diet, but when we're on a nutrition plan and, people, oh, you can't have that. Oh, okay. You can't have that. And I mean, that kind of reaffirming, and then to have that power given back to me to say, yes, I could have it. I'm choosing not to because I don't really want to rework my macros for today to make it fit, or, it's not worth it to me. And that was one of the things that really clicked for me, is that now that I was at choice, I could ask myself each time I had an opportunity to eat something, is this worth it? I know what is in this. I'll never forget when I looked up lobster bisque and I was thinking, how bad can it be? It's a half a cup. It's like this, it's a couple tablespoons. Oh my God, it's like 1,000 calories and tons of fat and all this stuff because of the heavy cream. But, learning, like for me, it's like, okay, yeah, does it taste good? Yes. Is it worth it? Oh, absolutely not. So it's that for me, it was the being at choice that freed me. And I know everybody's a little bit different and what motivates them and what makes them, feel comfortable doing certain things. I think that's one of the reasons why if you are hiring a coach or working with a nutritionist or anything else, you want somebody who's going to listen to what works for you. I can't tell you how many times it's funny. I'll tell somebody, I was given a meal plan and I hate avocados and it has avocados in it 3 times a day. And I told them, but they just said, no, eat it. So there's other ways to get fats. That's not the only way. And it's, not even necessarily the best way for every single person. So I think it really is important to, both from a lifestyle standpoint, an enjoyment standpoint, just a psychological standpoint, finding like what clicks with the individual. But again, that's what has brought me to utilizing macros in my, practice and working with, with clients and things like that, is that within that, I can work with a vegan. I can work with, different people that like different foods, or maybe they have certain food allergies or intolerances. They don't, they're not married to eating certain foods that aren't going to work for them. So again, it's to me, it's, that sense of freedom and finding what works. And like what you talked about too is, sometimes experimenting to see which foods feel best, and give you the most energy or digest really well or don't, so that way you can, especially if you're going to be stepping on stage, you don't want to eat something that bloats you during peak week. So understanding your body and what foods work best for it, I think are, that lends itself, doing the macros approach lends itself to doing that. And
I do think we really need to emphasize that point about the power of choice in a macros-based nutrition. And again, there are choices to make in a meal plan. So I'm not saying that in a meal plan you cannot make choices. You can. But with macros and that freedom of choice, that can be freeing for some. It can be debilitating for others. And so I think it's important just to recognize that, especially when you're new to macros and you're building that acumen, that knowledge, giving yourself some space, which we talk about a lot, is really important because yes, it's great to have choices. For some people, it can be very debilitating because they just want to know, what do I need to do? What are the boxes that I need to check? Just tell me what I need to do. And I understand that from a goal point of view or an objective point of view. But what I also believe, and I'm sure I can unearth a study or something that will deal with this, but that program will work for a period of time, but it is not sustainable over time. And I think that's why we see a lot of yo-yo dieting, because yo-yo dieting, based on whatever approach, Atkins or the Palm Beach diet or the Mediterranean diet or whatever, there's a bunch of diets, and why we don't like the D word. They will work. They will all work for a period of time, but at the end of the day, a guy I used to serve with in the military, he did these, I can't remember the name of the company, and I don't want to call them out or anything, but he did this, the meal planning was shakes, and you would have so many shakes during the day, and he found great success in that for a period of time. And then he would always rebound off of that. And he would always go back to where he was. It was not sustainable for him. So we had to get him away from that. But as we wrap up this show, let's talk about maybe just the key points for macros. So what macros are, if we were to list what macros are, and I don't mean carbohydrates, proteins, fats. I mean, what are the advantages that you see with macros?
Right. So macros are macronutrients, and the advantages. And so basically what we're saying is it's a budget. So I always like to think about it like dollars and cents. You have a budget for your household and you're going to spend so much. It's the same idea. You have a budget for your day, and then you're logging the foods you're eating and making sure you're staying within the budget. And obviously there's more nuances to it, but that's the basics.
And we know some people are better at budgeting than others.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
That's an insight into our life. But
yes.
Anyway.
Guess which one's better? Yeah. So the benefits are that, you are at choice. You have more flexibility with your food choices. You learn a lot about what foods feel good for you, what foods don't feel good for you. You also learn a lot about, what are the macronutrient makeups of different foods that you may or may not have known before. So that might influence your choice in what you think is a good choice for a meal. I think the learning part is one of the most valuable pieces of it. And I think the disadvantages are what you said, that, for some people it can be a little overwhelming. I feel like when people get overwhelmed, it's usually because they're overcomplicating it. So, the KISS principle is really great. Keep it simple, especially when you're starting. Create a day and repeat it. And then just replace something as you get tired of it. Just, and then that way you start slow instead of creating a whole new day every single day. And so there are ways to work around that, but I think that would be probably the number one disadvantage people see. And number two, I would say is, sometimes people will be making too many poor choices in terms of overly processed foods or foods that lack, the nutrient value.
And so if you were to contrast that then with the advantages to meal planning, what would you say are the advantages of meal plan?
Of using a meal plan.
Yeah.
So the advantages of using a meal plan is it's simple. You don't have to think about it. It's very easy to prep all your meals ahead of time, and then away you go. And then, of course, the disadvantages are that, while you may be provided with some alternatives, they're not going to be exact swap outs. And in some cases, and in my case, when I had my original meal plan, I wasn't given anything to swap it out anyway. So it can be a little bit constricting, and then it can ultimately turn into, having cravings and maybe falling off plan more frequently. For me, at least, that was the case. So definitely pros and cons to both. I mean, at the end of the day, obviously my choice would be macros. The thing I love about the macros is macros can be a meal plan. If you want to keep it simple, create a day and repeat it, there's your meal plan. So you can kind of merge the two together if you choose to do so, which I feel like is kind of the best of all worlds.
And you really hit on the point that I wanted to crescendo this with, which is, I think so many times in life, whether it's this discussion of macros versus meal plan or what is the right bodybuilding technique to pursue, and that people get into this binary approach of this or that, right or wrong, good or bad. And this will get into discussion of growth versus fixed mindset as well. But in this thing, you can make a choice that is not one or the other. You can make a choice that is macros oriented and then make that into a meal plan and still give yourself the flexibility that you need to create that sustainable lifestyle. You can do both. And I think that's really the appeal that I think of as the biggest advantage is that as you think about comparing and contrasting one or the other, I think there's a desire to say which one is better. Well, the best one, again, as we've talked about, is going to be the one that works best for you, but don't get into the mindset of thinking that they're so different, because there is a lot of overlap on both of them that you can follow. So this has been a great discussion about macros versus meal planning, and we hope you found it insightful and informative. And we will touch on these topics again. We have a guest that we're going to bring in at some point, Yvette Montero, who's going to talk about macros as a language. And that'll be a little bit more deeper dive into macros and how that approach has been successful for our platform. We will talk in that episode a little bit more about the different platforms that you can use and some other things around it, but more to follow on that. Do we say thanks for tuning into a podcast? Is that the appropriate thing to say, or is it thanks for clicking on a broadcast?
Tuning in. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in. All right, everybody, have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to FitBody Lifestyle. We hope today's episode has left you feeling motivated and equipped to tackle your fitness goals, business challenges, and the daily dance of life. Remember to value progress over perfection. Life's tough enough alone. Find the chosen family around you to help you along the way.
If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite streaming platform. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at FitBodyFusion.